This story is fictional. Any resemblance to real people or events is purely coincidental. Right in the middle of a family property mediation meeting, they treated me like a problem. Then the chief attending physician walked in holding doorbell camera footage with timestamps. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Maya Rowan. I'm 34 years old, a military veteran, and for most of my life, I've been the invisible one in my own family. If you asked my mother, Lillian Rowan, she would say that wasn't true. She'd press her hand to her chest, blink slowly like she'd just been wounded, and say, "I love my children the same." But love in our house was never evenly distributed. It was concentrated, focused, polished, and displayed like a trophy under warm lighting. And that light belonged to my older brother, Caleb Rowan. Caleb wasn't just the favorite. He was the heir, the firstborn, the one with the spark. That's what Mom called it. He has something special, she'd say when teachers excused his missing homework or when relatives laughed off his rude jokes. When Caleb got into college, there was a catered graduation party. When I enlisted in the Army at 19, my mom told people I was still figuring things out. I didn't enlist because I was lost. I enlisted because I was tired of feeling small. I wanted structure. I wanted to earn something that couldn't be taken away from me or compared to my brother's potential. I served 8 years, 2 deployments. I learned logistics, crisis coordination, documentation. I learned that if it isn't written down, it didn't happen. That rule would come back later in a way my family never saw coming. Growing up, I tried to be easy, low maintenance. I told myself it was strength not to need attention. When Caleb dropped out of college to build his brand, Mom called him bold. When I finished my degree online while working full-time, she said, "That's practical. Practical, not impressive, not extraordinary, just useful." Being useful became my role. So when Great Aunt Margot Whitmore's health began to decline 3 years ago, guess who got nominated to step in? Not Caleb. He had clients, he had expansion plans. He had networking events and golf outings and a social media feed full of motivational quotes about legacy. I had a remote operations job and no spouse, no kids. You're the responsible one. Mom told me at her kitchen table, sliding tea toward me like she was awarding a medal. Margot trusts you. You've always been so steady. Steady. Another word for available. At first, I didn't mind. Aunt Margot had always been kind to me. She'd slip me $5 bills when I was little and whisper, "For ice cream, don't tell your mother." She remembered my birthdays without a Facebook reminder. When her memory started slipping, it felt wrong not to show up. So I did. Every day after work, I drove to her house on Hawthorne Drive, the old family property everyone talked about like it was already an inheritance. I organized her medications in color-coded containers. I scheduled appointments. I handled insurance calls that lasted longer than some of my military briefings. I cleaned the kitchen, did laundry, trimmed the rose bushes she used to care for herself. I slept on her couch when she got anxious at night. There was no paycheck, no contract, no written agreement, just family. Caleb would visit once a week, usually when cousins were around. He'd bring bakery cookies, take selfies with Aunt Margot, and post them with captions like, "Taking care of our matriarch, family first." People commented heart emojis, "You're such a good grandson," even though technically he wasn't. No one corrected them. Meanwhile, I was the one arguing with pharmacists over dosage adjustments. Then things started shifting. When Aunt Margot forgot to turn off the stove one afternoon, Mom called me in a panic. "Why weren't you there?" she demanded. "I was at work," I said, like I always am from 9 to 5. "Well, if you were more attentive, more attentive." I had spreadsheets tracking every prescription refill. I had appointment summaries saved in a shared drive. I had timestamps on every grocery delivery. But in my family, documentation didn't matter. Narrative did. And the narrative was evolving. Slowly, subtly, I became not the devoted caregiver, but the gatekeeper, the one controlling access, the one overstepping. When doctors recommended transitioning Aunt Margot into assisted living for safety, Caleb suddenly had opinions. "We should think about the property," he said during one Sunday dinner. "It's worth a lot now. Developers are making offers." Mom nodded like this was visionary thinking. "Your brother's just being practical." Practical. That word again. It never belonged to me alone. Soon enough, I was being told I was too emotional about the house, that I was resisting change. that I had complicated the process. Complicated. That's the word they used at the mediation meeting. The room smelled like stale coffee and printer ink. There was a long, polished table and a neutral-toned rug that probably cost more than my first car. The mediator, a calm woman in a beige blazer, folded her hands and said gently, "Maya, your family feels you've made it difficult to move forward with selling the property." My family feels. Caleb sat back in his chair, confident, polished. Mom dabbed at her eyes like she'd been carrying the weight of this for years. "We're just worried about you," she said. "You've been overwhelmed. Maybe you blurred some lines." Blurred lines. I had binders, digital backups, call logs. I kept my posture straight, my voice steady. Military training is good for that. And then the door opened. Dr. Adrian Keller, the chief attending physician overseeing Aunt Margot's care, stepped inside, holding a thick folder and a small external hard drive. He didn't look confused. He looked prepared. "I apologize for the interruption," he said calmly. "But before any decisions are finalized, there are discrepancies in the information provided to the care team that need to be addressed." He glanced at me briefly, then at my mother, then at Caleb. "I brought documentation." The room went quiet in a way that felt heavier than shouting, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't the only one holding receipts. Caleb's confident smile twitched just for a second, and something in my chest, something that had been coiled tight for years, started to unwind. Because the story they'd been telling about me, it was about to collapse. The silence after Dr. Keller said, "I brought documentation," felt like the kind that settles right before a storm hits. The mediator blinked. "Dr. Keller, this is a private family mediation." "I understand," he replied evenly, setting the thick folder down on the table. "But since my patient's well-being and reported care history have been cited as part of this property decision, I believe the record should be accurate." Accurate. That word landed differently than emotional, different than complicated. My mother shifted in her seat. "We weren't aware this would involve medical disclosures." Dr. Keller folded his hands, calm, unshaken. "You signed the HIPAA authorization last month, Mrs. Rowan." Mom's lips parted, closed. She glanced at Caleb. He leaned forward, smile back in place, smooth as ever. "Doctor, with respect, we're not disputing Aunt Margot's condition. We're simply trying to make responsible decisions about the house." "The house," Dr. Keller repeated as if testing the weight of it. I stayed quiet. In the Army, you learn something important. When someone starts over-explaining, let them. They'll eventually contradict themselves. Dr. Keller opened the folder. Inside were printed emails, medication logs, and, most noticeably, a set of still images, black and white frames with timestamps. My stomach flipped. Doorbell camera footage. Not from my house, from Aunt Margot's. Caleb's jaw tightened for half a second before he caught himself. What exactly is this? "Security footage from the Whitmore residence," Dr. Keller said, "installed 18 months ago at the request of the primary caregiver." The primary caregiver. He didn't look at Caleb when he said it. He looked at me. My mother frowned. "We didn't know there were cameras." "Yes," Dr. Keller said gently. "That's clear." The mediator leaned forward. "How is this relevant to today's discussion?" Doc Keller didn't rush. He slid one of the still images across the table. It showed Aunt Margot standing at the front door at 11:42 p.m., robe half-buttoned, looking confused. The timestamp was sharp in the corner. And then another image. 12:03 a.m., me arriving, hair tied back, sweatpants, keys in hand. There were multiple reports, Dr. Keller said, flipping to a printed email, that Miss Rowan was inconsistently present and failed to respond during key episodes of confusion. He didn't say who made those reports. He didn't need to. Mom cleared her throat. "We were concerned about gaps in supervision." Dr. Keller raised a single sheet of paper. "On March 12th at 9:14 a.m., I received a call from Mr. Caleb Rowan stating that Miss Rowan had not been present for 3 consecutive nights." The air thinned. I felt my pulse in my ears. Dr. Keller placed 3 printed screenshots on the table. March 10th, 11:58 p.m., me entering the house. March 11th, 12:07 a.m., me entering again. March 12th, 12:15 a.m., me. Every single night. Caleb laughed lightly. Too lightly. "Okay, but that doesn't show what happened inside. Showing up doesn't mean you were actually attentive." There it was. The pivot. My mother nodded quickly. "Exactly. We were worried she was overwhelmed. We just wanted what was best for Margot." Dr. Keller reached into the folder again and pulled out something thicker. A printed medication administration record, signed, dated, every dose logged. In addition, he said, Miss Rowan submitted digital medication logs weekly. They match pharmacy pickup records and our own charting. The mediator looked between us, eyebrows raised. Caleb's knees started bouncing under the table. I could see it from where I sat. I didn't speak yet. I didn't need to. Dr. Keller wasn't finished. There is also footage, he continued carefully, of multiple scheduled visitation windows where certain family members stated they were present for extended periods. He tapped another still frame, Caleb at the front door. 3:18 p.m., another frame. 3:26 p.m., Caleb leaving. 8 minutes. He'd told the care team he was there for hours. The room went very, very quiet. Mom leaned forward. That's out of context. He could have gone to his car. For 2 hours? The mediator asked softly. Caleb's jaw flexed. This feels like an ambush. I finally spoke. It's just timestamps. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. Isn't that what we're here for? Clarity? Caleb turned toward me fully now. You've always loved keeping records, haven't you? Making everything a report. There was an edge in his voice. Not loud, not explosive, but sharp. Yes, I said. I do. Because in a family that rewrites history, records are survival. Dr. Keller closed the folder but didn't remove his hand from it. There's more, he said. And something in his tone told me this was only the first layer. Caleb sat back, arms crossing now. Mom reached for her purse like she might need tissues. The mediator cleared her throat. Doctor, if there are additional facts that materially affect the decision regarding the property and the narrative of caregiving responsibility, we need to hear them. Dr. Keller nodded once. Then he reached for the external hard drive. I believe, he said calmly, it would be appropriate to review the full sequence from April 3rd. April 3rd. The date hit my chest like a fist, because April 3rd wasn't just any day. It was the day everything shifted. And judging by the way Caleb's face drained of color, he knew exactly why. April 3rd. The second Dr. Keller said the date, I felt the air leave my lungs. Across the table, Caleb shifted in his chair, just barely. But I've spent enough years reading body language in high-stress rooms to recognize a stress response. His jaw tightened. His fingers, which had been drumming lightly against the polished wood table, stilled completely. Mom looked confused. What happened April 3rd? She asked, turning toward him instead of me. That told me everything. Caleb forced a small laugh. I mean, I visited that week. I don't remember exact dates. Dr. Keller didn't smile back. He connected the hard drive to the conference room monitor. The screen flickered, then filled with the familiar black and white view of Aunt Margot's front porch. Timestamp, April 3rd, 2:11 p.m. There had been a medication discrepancy reported that week, Dr. Keller said calmly, specifically regarding missed doses of her anticoagulant. Mom gasped softly. Missed doses? Caleb leaned forward. She was confused sometimes. Maybe she refused them. I felt heat rise in my chest. Refused them? I had logs. I had alarms set on my phone. I had backup pill organizers in case one dropped. Dr. Keller clicked forward. 2:13 p.m. Caleb at the door, sunglasses on, phone in hand. He entered. The next clip jumped to 3:02 p.m. He exited. 49 minutes. Longer than the 8-minute photo op visits, but not hours. Dr. Keller paused the footage. Now, he said, let's look at the interior camera. Mom's head snapped up. Interior? Yes, he replied evenly. Installed after 2 prior incidents where Ms. Whitmore left the stove on. The primary caregiver authorized it. Again, he didn't look at Caleb. He looked at me. The footage shifted to the kitchen. Grainy, wide angle, Aunt Margot sitting at the table, Caleb standing by the counter. 3:14 p.m. He opened the medication drawer. My stomach dropped. I knew exactly what was in that drawer. Dr. Keller zoomed slightly. Caleb held one of the weekly pill organizers in his hand. He flipped it open, looked inside. Then, very clearly, he removed 2 compartments and set them aside. Mom inhaled sharply. What is he doing? Caleb's voice was quick. I was checking, making sure it was correct. The timestamp continued. 3:18 p.m. He took a photo of the pill organizer with his phone. 3:20 p.m. He placed it back, without the compartments he'd removed. My pulse roared in my ears. Because I remembered that night, I'd arrived just before midnight. Aunt Margot had been unusually restless. Her blood pressure slightly elevated. I double-checked the medications and noticed 2 doses missing from earlier that day. I'd assumed she'd accidentally dropped them. I'd documented it, reported it, adjusted accordingly. I never once considered, "You told me," Dr. Keller said quietly, glancing at Caleb, that Ms. Rowan had failed to administer medication on April 3rd. Caleb swallowed. "That's what I was told." "By whom?" the mediator asked. Silence. Mom looked at him, eyes wide now, not defensive, not protective, confused. I saw the organizer," Caleb said, voice tightening. "It was empty. I assumed." "You removed the doses at 3:14 p.m., Dr. Keller said, tapping the screen gently. "The timestamp is clear." The room felt smaller. Caleb shook his head. "That's not what that shows. You can't prove intent." Intent. He jumped straight to legal language. That was his tell. I finally spoke. "You called Dr. Keller's office the next morning," I said, my voice steady but low. "At 9:14 a.m., you said I'd been negligent." Caleb turned to me sharply. "Because that's what it looked like." "To you," I replied. "After you took the doses out?" Mom pressed her hands to her temples. "Why would you do that, Caleb?" He exhaled hard. "I was documenting a problem. That's all. I was trying to show that Maya was overwhelmed." Overwhelmed. The word felt like acid. Dr. Keller reached into the folder again. "There's one more relevant detail," he said. He slid a printed bank statement across the table. "Not mine. Caleb's." My breath caught. "During the same week," Dr. Keller continued, "there were inquiries made regarding an early valuation of the Whitmore property." The mediator looked up. "By whom?" Dr. Keller didn't answer. He didn't need to. Caleb leaned back, arms crossing again, but this time it wasn't confidence. It was defense. "We were planning ahead," he said quickly. "Mom asked me to explore options. That doesn't mean anything." Mom looked at him slowly. "I didn't ask you to do that in April." A crack. Small, but audible. Caleb's eyes flickered. "Well, you mentioned it around then." "No," Mom said quietly. "That was June." There it was, the slip. Dates and money. Always the details. I felt something shift inside me. Not rage. Not even vindication. Clarity. For years, I'd questioned my own memory, wondered if I was too sensitive, too rigid, too attached. But timestamps don't gaslight you. Bank records don't play favorites. Dr. Keller powered down the monitor. "The care team has no concerns regarding Ms. Rowan's consistency or competence," he said firmly. "In fact, without her documentation and late-night interventions, Ms. Whitmore likely would have required emergency hospitalization sooner." Mom stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time. Not as practical, not as steady, but as necessary. The mediator folded her hands slowly. "It seems," she said carefully, "that the narrative presented about Ms. Rowan's caregiving may not align with the documented record." Caleb let out a sharp breath. "So what? We're just ignoring the fact that she's emotionally attached to that house?" Emotionally attached. I almost laughed, because he still didn't get it. The house had never been the point. And now, for the first time, I realized something else. I wasn't trapped in this room. I wasn't dependent on their version of events. There was a piece of my life they didn't know about. Something I'd built quietly. Something with leverage. And as the mediator began discussing revised considerations, I felt the weight of that hidden card in my back pocket. They thought this meeting was about a house. They had no idea what I was about to put on the table next. The mediator called for a 10-minute recess. No one moved right away. Mom was staring at the bank statement like it might rearrange itself into something more comforting if she blinked enough times. Caleb was scrolling on his phone, too casually, jaw tight, thumb moving fast. Damage control mode. Dr. Keller gathered his folder but didn't leave. He looked at me instead. "You okay, Miss Rowan?" he asked quietly. I nodded once. "Yes, sir." Old habits, respect layered into my spine. "You've done everything right," he said, just loud enough for the room to hear. I made sure to come prepared because the care team was concerned about how the narrative was shifting. Narrative. That word again. Mom's head snapped up. Shifting how? Dr. Keller met her eyes evenly. "There were repeated claims that your daughter was inconsistent, emotionally unstable, and resistant to medical guidance." Emotionally unstable. The words didn't sting the way they would have 5 years ago. They felt tired, predictable. Mom's gaze drifted to Caleb. He stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous. We're blowing up a simple property discussion over some technical misunderstandings. Technical misunderstandings, like removing medication doses and reporting negligence, like 8-minute visits labeled as extended caregiving." The mediator cleared her throat. "Mr. Rowan, Intent aside, misrepresentation of care history materially affects this mediation. Caleb exhaled hard through his nose. Fine, maybe I got some dates wrong, but the bigger issue is still the property. Margot isn't going back home. The house is sitting there. Maya's the only one resisting a sale. All eyes turned to me. And here it was, the pivot. He was doubling down. I folded my hands on the table, steady. I'm not resisting a sale. Mom frowned. You said it felt wrong to sell. I said it felt rushed, I corrected calmly. There's a difference, Caleb scoffed. Rushed? It's been months. Yes, I said evenly. Months where I was still coordinating care transitions, finalizing insurance, and ensuring Margot's assisted living contract was stable. Selling a property while those pieces were in motion would have been financially irresponsible. Financially irresponsible? That landed. Caleb tilted his head. Since when are you a real estate expert? Since I built a life you never bothered to ask about, but I didn't say that yet. Instead, I reached into my leather portfolio, the same one I'd brought to countless operational briefings overseas, and slid a slim envelope onto the table. Mom looked confused. What's that? My copy, I said. Of what? Caleb asked sharply. Great Aunt Margot's revised estate directive. Silence. The mediator's eyebrows shot up. Revised? Dr. Keller didn't look surprised. Caleb leaned forward slowly. What are you talking about? I kept my voice level. 2 years ago, when Margot's cognitive evaluations first showed early decline, she met with her attorney. I was present. Mom's face drained. You never told me that. You never asked, I replied gently. Caleb's laugh was brittle. Oh, this is good. You just conveniently forgot to mention an estate directive? I didn't forget, I said. It wasn't relevant until now. The mediator extended her hand. May I? I slid the document toward her. She established a caregiving stipend, I continued calmly. Retroactive to the date I began daily support. Mom's head snapped up. A stipend? Yes. Caleb's face flushed. You've been getting paid? No, I said. I haven't touched it. That part was important. It's been accumulating in a trust account, I added. Under Margot's instruction, managed by her attorney, the funds are designated specifically for the primary caregiver. If the property is sold, the stipend must be disbursed in full before any proceeds are distributed. The room went dead still. Mom whispered, How much? I met her eyes, enough to cover 3 years of full-time private caregiving rates. Caleb's chair scraped loudly as he pushed back. That's insane. She manipulated Margot into this. Dr. Keller's voice was firm. Miss Whitmore requested that structure after expressing concern about burdening her niece without compensation. Mom looked at me, stunned. Margot said that? Yes, I said softly. She didn't want me working 2 jobs. I hadn't told them. About the nights I logged back into my remote operations role at 2 a.m. after settling Margot down. About the weekends I skipped social events because someone had to refill prescriptions. Caleb shook his head. This is opportunistic. The mediator glanced up from the document. This directive is legally binding. It's notarized and witnessed. Caleb's eyes darted. When was it signed? May 17th, I said calmly. He hesitated because earlier he'd claimed discussions about selling started in April at Mom's request. Mom slowly turned toward him. Caleb, we didn't talk about selling until June. There it was again, the slip. Dates. Money. The 2 things he always prided himself on mastering. He opened his mouth, closed it. I was planning ahead. For yourself? Mom asked quietly. The air felt different now, not hostile. Revealing. I sat back slightly. This was never about the house for me, I said. It was about stability for Margot and fairness. Caleb's eyes narrowed. So what? You're cashing out now? I shook my head. No, the word landed heavier than I expected. I'm invoking the clause that delays any sale for 90 days following full stipend disbursement. The mediator nodded slowly. That clause exists. Mom stared at me. Why 90 days? Because, I said evenly. For the first time in my life, I'd like space to make decisions without being pressured or misrepresented. Caleb laughed again, but it lacked force. So this is revenge. I looked at him steadily. No, I said. This is documentation. Justice through receipts. Dr. Keller closed his folder with a quiet, decisive sound. The mediator folded her hands. Given these developments, I recommend we adjourn and reconvene after legal review. Mom looked smaller somehow. Caleb looked cornered. And for the first time in that room, I wasn't invisible. But as we gathered our things, Caleb leaned closer to me, voice low enough that only I could hear. You think this makes you powerful? He muttered. You've just made this permanent. I met his gaze without flinching. No, I said quietly. You did. And as we walked out of that conference room, I knew this wasn't over. Because Caleb had lost control of the narrative, and men like him don't surrender that easily. The hallway outside the mediation room smelled like lemon cleaner and overbrewed coffee. Neutral. Artificial. Like the building itself didn't want to take sides. Mom walked ahead of us, quiet for once. Caleb hung back beside me, hands in his pockets, jaw working like he was chewing on words he hadn't decided whether to spit out yet. You blindsided us, he said finally. I kept walking. You mean I came prepared? You sat on that estate directive for 2 years. It wasn't relevant until someone started questioning my competence. He scoffed. You always do this. You wait, you collect, you build a case. I stopped walking, because he wasn't entirely wrong. I learned to document, I said evenly, because growing up in this family, if I didn't, reality changed. His eyes flashed. Oh, here we go, the victim speech. I'm not a victim, I replied calmly. I'm informed. Mom turned around then. Can we not do this in the hallway? Her voice was brittle, controlled. She looked like someone who had just realized a story she'd been telling for years had holes in it. We stepped outside into the parking lot. The sky was overcast, low and gray like it couldn't decide whether to storm. Mom hugged her purse tighter. Maya, why didn't you tell me Margot set up a stipend? I exhaled slowly. Because every time money comes up in this family, it becomes leverage. Caleb let out a short laugh. You're the one using it as leverage. No, I said, turning to face him fully. I'm using it as protection. Mom looked between us. Protection from what? From being turned into the unpaid help, I said quietly. That landed harder than I expected. Mom blinked. We never saw you that way. You didn't have to, I replied. I lived it. Silence stretched between us. Caleb shifted his weight. So what now? You're just going to drain the trust and stall the sale? I'm going to follow the terms Margot set, I said. 90 days. After that, we can revisit everything, with accurate information. Mom's shoulders sagged slightly. This didn't have to be adversarial. It didn't, I agreed. But once I was accused of negligence, it stopped being collaborative. Caleb's tone sharpened. You're acting like I tried to sabotage you. I held his gaze. You removed medication compartments and reported me. His mouth opened quickly. I was checking for inconsistencies. You created one. He stepped closer. You can't prove intent. I didn't raise my voice. I don't need to. That frustrated him more than if I'd yelled. Mom looked at Caleb again, slower this time. Why didn't you just talk to your sister? He hesitated, just long enough. I was concerned, he said finally. She was stretched thin. I thought if the doctor saw gaps, maybe we could push for assisted living sooner. Push. There it was again. Acceleration, deadlines, money timelines. And the early property valuation? I asked softly. That was planning. In April? Mom asked again, her voice thinner now. Caleb's eyes flickered. Rough estimates don't mean I was trying to sell it behind anyone's back. I watched him carefully. In the Army, when someone's under pressure, you don't attack. You wait. People fill silence with truth. You said earlier Mom asked you to explore selling in April, I said calmly, but she didn't mention it until June. He rubbed the back of his neck. I misspoke. Another crack, small but visible. Mom looked at him like she was recalculating something. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Justice through receipts doesn't require volume. It requires consistency. Mom finally looked at me again. So what do you want, Maya? Not what do you demand, not what are you threatening, what do you want? It was the first time she'd asked that without assumption. I thought about it carefully. I want space, I said. 90 days of email-only communication regarding anything legal or financial. Caleb frowned. Email only? What are we, coworkers? In matters involving property and estate decisions, I said calmly. Yes. Mom's brows knit together. That feels cold. What felt cold, I replied gently, was being told I was negligent when I was sleeping on a couch 3 nights a week. She flinched. I continued, steady. I also want one more thing. Caleb crossed his arms. Of course you do. I ignored him. I don't want either of you demanding roles in my personal milestones going forward. Mom blinked. Milestones? When I graduate from my MBA program next spring, I said, watching their surprise carefully, I don't want to negotiate seating charts based on who feels entitled. Silence. Caleb stared. You're in grad school? Yes. Since when? 2 years. Mom's mouth parted slightly. Why didn't you tell us? I held her gaze. When would I have? That wasn't cruel. It was factual. The room, no. The parking lot felt different now. I wasn't just the caregiver. I wasn't just the practical one. I had a life they'd never bothered to ask about. And, I continued evenly, if we're going to move forward as a family, I want a commitment to at least 6 sessions of family therapy, together. Caleb laughed sharply. You've got to be kidding. I'm not. Mom looked overwhelmed. Therapy? Yes, Caleb shook his head. So this is the price? No, I said quietly. This is the boundary. The wind picked up slightly, tugging at Mom's hair. For 90 days, I continued, email-only contact regarding estate matters. No pressure to be part of my milestones unless invited, and 6 therapy sessions before we revisit anything personal. Caleb stared at me like he didn't recognize me. Maybe he didn't, because the version of me they were used to would have swallowed this. Smiled, adjusted. Mom finally spoke, voice softer. And if we say no? I didn't hesitate. Then we keep it strictly legal. The words weren't loud, but they were final. Caleb's jaw tightened again. Mom looked at both of us, caught between something breaking and something being revealed. And for the first time, I wasn't asking to be seen. I was stating terms. Caleb exhaled slowly. You think you've won? I met his eyes. This isn't about winning. But as he looked away first, I knew something fundamental had shifted. And deep down, I also knew this wasn't the last move he'd make. Because losing control of the narrative wasn't something my brother handled well. And people who double down, they don't stop at one denial. They escalate. I just didn't know yet how far he was willing to go. Caleb didn't call that night. He didn't text either, which meant he was thinking. That was always more dangerous. Mom, on the other hand, sent a single message at 9:42 p.m. Can we talk? Not about the property, just us. I stared at the notification for a long time before locking my phone. Email only. If I bent the boundary on day 1, it wasn't a boundary. It was a suggestion. Instead of responding, I opened my laptop, because while they were recalculating, so was I. And there's something about years in the military that rewires you. You don't just react, you assess risk. You consider contingencies. You prepare for second and third order effects. Caleb had been publicly corrected in that mediation room. He'd been exposed on record. Men like him don't process that quietly. They spin. And sure enough, the spin started the next morning. I woke up to 3 missed calls from relatives I rarely heard from. Then a text from my cousin Brianna. Hey, I don't know what's going on, but Caleb said things got ugly yesterday. He said you accused him of tampering with medication? That's serious, Maya. I exhaled slowly. There it was. Victim mode. I didn't respond right away. I brewed coffee, sat at my kitchen table, watched steam curl into the air. Then my phone buzzed again. A group family thread I'd muted months ago had suddenly come alive. Caleb, I didn't want to involve everyone, but since my integrity is being questioned, I feel I need to clarify. Clarify. I didn't open the thread. Instead, I opened my secure drive. Every care log, every timestamp, every email with Dr. Keller's office, receipts, justice through receipts. If he wanted to escalate publicly, I could respond publicly, with facts, but escalation wasn't always the smartest move. Sometimes restraint is louder. Around noon, Mom called again. This time I answered. Hi, she said, voice already trembling. Hi, Mom. Why are relatives calling me asking about medication tampering? I leaned back in my chair because Caleb is reframing. She exhaled shakily. He says you're implying he endangered Margot. I didn't imply anything, I said calmly. The footage speaks for itself. Silence. He says he was trying to help you, she added quietly. I'm sure that's how he's telling it. Mom hesitated. Maya, is there anything you're not telling me? There it was, the question underneath the question. Was I hiding something worse? No, I said evenly. But there is something I haven't told either of you. She inhaled softly. What? I've already met with a real estate attorney independently. Another silence. Thicker this time. Why? She asked. Because if Caleb attempts to push a sale prematurely or misrepresent caregiving again, I need to be prepared. Mom sounded hurt. Prepared against your own family? I closed my eyes briefly. Yes. She didn't respond immediately. Then, quietly, you've changed. I almost laughed. No, I said gently. I've stopped absorbing. That landed. Mom's voice shifted, softer, less defensive. He feels attacked, she said. He feels exposed, I corrected. She didn't argue that. He said, she continued carefully, that the property valuation in April wasn't for selling, it was for refinancing options in case Margot needed private memory care. I let the silence stretch. Did he tell you, I asked calmly, that the valuation request included a projected developer offer? She didn't answer right away. Did it? She asked finally. Yes, another crack. Small, but widening. I didn't know that, she whispered. I know, I said, and that was the truth. For all her favoritism, Mom didn't always know the details. She trusted Caleb with financial strategy because he spoke confidently. Confidence can sound like competence, especially when you want to believe it. By late afternoon, Caleb finally called. I let it ring twice before answering. What are you doing? He demanded. Working. You've turned the family against me. No, I said calmly. Your timeline inconsistencies did. He exhaled sharply. You could have handled this privately. We were in mediation, I reminded him. You didn't have to bring up the stipend. You accused me of negligence. He paused, then shifted tactics. You know what this looks like? He said, tone suddenly wounded. It looks like you were waiting for Margot to decline so you could secure your payout. There it was, the ugliest version. I didn't react immediately. In the Army, when someone throws a grenade, you don't chase it. You assess blast radius. I haven't touched the trust, I said evenly. Yet. I won't, I continued calmly, until the legal disbursement timeline requires it. He laughed bitterly. You always have an answer. Yes, I said quietly, because I prepare. Silence stretched between us. Then he slipped. You think that 90-day delay is going to stop me? Once the property hits the market, it's listing at 1.8 minimum. I froze internally. Outwardly, my voice stayed level. 1.8? He paused. Too late. That's what the developer floated, he said quickly. It's not final. In April? I asked softly. Another silence. Longer. You're twisting things, he snapped. No, I said. I'm listening, because here's what he'd just done. He'd confirmed a projected developer price tied to the April valuation request. The same month he'd claimed Mom asked him to explore options. She hadn't, which meant he wasn't just planning. He was positioning. I have the email chain from the valuation firm, I said quietly. It's dated April 5th. He didn't respond. You forwarded it to your business partner, I added. Subject line, long-term play. The silence on the other end shifted from defensive to alarmed. How do you have that? He demanded. I leaned back slowly, because here it was, twist number one, the part of my life they'd never asked about. I consult part-time in compliance auditing, I said calmly. Real estate disclosures fall under that umbrella. Silence. And, I continued, Margot authorized shared oversight access to any inquiries made regarding her property after cognitive decline was noted. He didn't breathe for a second. You had no right. I had full legal access, he swore under his breath. You've been watching me? No, I said, I've been protecting her. And protecting myself. The line went quiet, then softer but sharper. You think you're smarter than me now. I didn't take the bait. I think you underestimated me. That landed. Hard. He didn't yell. He didn't explode. He just said very quietly, this isn't over. And then he hung up. I sat there staring at my phone long after the call ended. Because I knew he was right. It wasn't over. He doubled down publicly, slipped privately, and now he knew I wasn't just the steady, practical sister anymore. I had documentation, I had legal leverage, and I had a life he never bothered to notice. But escalation cuts both ways, and if he was willing to question my integrity, I needed to be ready for what he'd try next. By Friday, the family group chat had split into factions. Not loudly, not dramatically, but subtly. The kind of quiet side texting that happens when people don't want to choose sides publicly, but still want proximity to the perceived winner. Caleb had posted a long message Wednesday night about misunderstandings, high emotions, and concerns over disproportionate financial influence. He never used my name directly. He didn't have to. I didn't respond in the thread. Instead, I emailed the mediator, copying Caleb and Mom, summarizing the facts discussed, attaching the relevant sections of the estate directive, and reiterating the 90-day clause. Professional tone, bullet points, no emotion. Within an hour, 2 aunts who hadn't spoken to me in years sent me private messages that read suspiciously like they'd been forwarded. Sweetheart, is it true you're trying to block the sale? Your brother says you're demanding money up front. Demanding. Interesting choice of word for funds legally allocated. Caleb wasn't attacking the facts. He was reshaping the optics. which meant he'd realized something. He couldn't win on documentation, so he'd try to win on perception. Mom called again Friday evening. This time her voice was different, less frantic, more unsettled. Caleb says you accessed his business email. I closed my laptop slowly. No, I did not. He says you're spying. I accessed valuation correspondence sent to the Whitmore Property Oversight account, I said calmly, which Margot authorized. Mom was quiet. He says that's invasive. It's oversight. Another silence. Then carefully, he also said something else. I waited. He said you've always resented him. Ah, we were back to childhood. I don't resent him, I said evenly. I resent being dismissed. Mom exhaled slowly. He feels like you've been keeping score. I almost smiled, because she was closer to the truth than she realized. I've been keeping records, I corrected gently. There's a difference. She didn't argue that. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment staring at the framed photo on my bookshelf. It was from my second deployment. Me in uniform. Sand behind me, eyes squinting in harsh sun. Caleb hadn't come to my homecoming. He'd had a conference. Mom had said, you know how important networking is for his career. I'd swallowed it, like always. But swallowing things doesn't make them disappear, it just stores them. And eventually, storage overflows. Saturday morning, Caleb showed up at my apartment unannounced. Boundary violation number 1. I opened the door but didn't step aside. You said email only, I reminded him. I'm not here about the property. His tone was clipped. Then what are you here about? He looked at me for a long second. You embarrassed me. There it was, not, you hurt me. Not, I'm sorry. You embarrassed me. The footage embarrassed you, I replied calmly. He ran a hand through his hair. You could have handled that privately. You reported me privately, I said. That's different. How? I was concerned, and I was defending my competence. He stepped closer. You've turned this into a courtroom. No, I said quietly. I brought the courtroom to the narrative. He blinked. That wasn't a phrase he expected. You always wanted to prove you were better, he said. Better. That word again. I wanted to be treated equally, I replied. He laughed without humor. You think this makes you equal? No, I said. It makes me documented. Silence stretched between us. Then he shifted again. New tactic. You know the stipend payout is going to look bad, right? He said softly. Relatives are already whispering. I'm aware. You don't care? I care about truth, I said, not whispers. He studied me carefully now, as if recalibrating. You've changed since the army, he said. I've changed since being the only one in crisis response, I corrected. He looked away first this time. Then, casually, too casually, he said, you know, if you waive part of the stipend, it would smooth things over. There it was. Money. Finally direct. And if I don't? I asked. He shrugged. It'll confirm what people already think. And what's that? That you're using Margot's decline to cash out. The audacity was almost impressive. I haven't touched the account. I repeated calmly, but you will. When the legal timeline requires. He shook his head. You're impossible. No, I said evenly. I'm structured. He exhaled hard. You don't understand how optics work. I tilted my head slightly. I do, I said, which is why I haven't responded publicly yet. That caught him. You're planning something. No, I said truthfully. I'm waiting. For what? For you to decide whether you want repair or reputation. That silenced him, because he didn't know which answer he'd choose yet. He looked at me for a long time. You think Mom's starting to doubt me, he said quietly. I didn't answer. He continued anyway. She's confused. You've made this confusing. No, I said softly. The dates did. He flinched. Then he did something unexpected. He leaned closer and lowered his voice. You think Dr. Keller's on your side? He's on the side of documented care. He won't always be. A warning or a threat. I didn't react. It's email only. I reminded him again, stepping back slightly. He held my gaze for a beat longer. This isn't over, he repeated. And for the second time that week, he walked away without slamming a door, which meant he was still calculating. And that worried me more than if he'd yelled, because Caleb didn't implode, he maneuvered. And if he couldn't discredit my caregiving, he'd try to discredit something else. I just didn't know yet what he'd aim at next. But I had a feeling it wouldn't be the property. It would be me. The next shot didn't land where I expected. It landed at my job. Monday morning, I logged into my company portal and saw a flag notification from HR, Compliance Review Inquiry, External Allegation. My pulse didn't spike. It narrowed. External allegation. I clicked it open. An anonymous report claimed I had leveraged privileged access to personal financial records of a family member for retaliatory purposes. I leaned back slowly in my chair. There it was. Not the property, not the stipend. My credibility. He couldn't win on the caregiving narrative, so now he was testing whether I'd overstepped professionally. Except I hadn't. And that's the difference between paranoia and preparation. I forwarded the notice to my direct supervisor with a simple message requesting formal review. Documentation attached. Then I attached everything. Margot's notarized authorization, the estate directive, the oversight access clause, the exact portal through which valuation inquiries were copied, separate from Caleb's business account. Receipts. Always receipts. By noon, my supervisor Angela called. "I'm guessing this is connected to your family mediation," she said gently. "Yes," she exhaled. "You disclosed a potential conflict of interest 2 years ago." "I did." "And you recused yourself from any paid audits connected to that property." "Yes." "I don't see a violation here," she said. "But compliance will document it formally." "Thank you." She paused. "Off the record? Okay. Whoever filed this didn't understand how access controls work." I almost smiled. "Or hoped you didn't," she added. When I hung up, I didn't feel angry. I felt confirmed. Caleb wasn't just spinning narrative. He was escalating. And escalation creates trails. That afternoon, Mom called again. "Caleb said someone from your company contacted him." I kept my voice neutral. "Compliance may verify authorization documents." "He's furious, I imagine." She hesitated. "He thinks you reported him." "I didn't," I said evenly. "An allegation was filed," I responded. Silence, then softer. "Did he file it?" "I don't know," I said truthfully, but we both knew. Mom sounded tired. "He says you're trying to ruin his reputation." I stared at the framed deployment photo again. "No," I said quietly, "I'm refusing to let him ruin mine." She didn't argue that. There was a shift happening. Not dramatic, but perceptible. For the first time in our lives, Caleb wasn't the unquestioned narrator. And Mom didn't have a script ready. "Caleb said," she began slowly, "that if you really cared about Margot, you'd agree to list the property at market value immediately and place the stipend back into the estate pool. The real ask. Not optics. Not therapy. Money flow." I let that hang between us. "Did he mention the 1.8 developer projection?" I asked gently. She didn't respond right away. "He said that number wasn't solid." "It was in writing," I said. Another pause. He told me," she said carefully, "that the developer might withdraw if we delay." "And if they do?" I asked. "That would lower the estate's value." "For whom?" I asked quietly. The question lingered. Mom exhaled slowly. "I didn't realize the valuation inquiry was that early," she admitted. "I didn't say I know. I didn't need to. Instead, I shifted. Mom, can I ask you something?" "Yes. If I hadn't documented everything, would you have believed I was negligent?" She didn't answer immediately, and in that silence, I got my answer. "I don't know," she said finally. "Honest. Painful, but honest." "Thank you," I replied softly. She cleared her throat. "He's asking to meet, all of us, in person. Email only," I reminded her. "He says that's childish. It's structured." Another silence. "Would you consider coffee?" she asked gently. Neutral ground. There it was, the first olive branch. Or maybe reconnaissance. "I'll think about it," I said. That evening, Caleb sent a formal email. Subject line, request for direct discussion. Professional tone, no sarcasm. He proposed meeting at a cafe downtown Wednesday at 3 p.m. He CC'd Mom. He did not accuse, he did not spin, which meant he was recalibrating again. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I opened a new document because if we were meeting, it would be structured. Boundaries, talking points, clear conditions. Soft revenge isn't shouting, it's clarity, and clarity requires preparation. As I typed, I realized something else. There was one piece of my hidden life I hadn't revealed yet. Not the MBA, not the compliance work. Something else, something Caleb didn't know existed. And if he tried to corner me publicly at that cafe, I might finally use it. I just hadn't decided yet. I responded to the email with one sentence. I can meet Wednesday at 3 p.m. provided we remain within previously stated boundaries. Caleb replied within 5 minutes. Agreed. Short, controlled, calculated. I closed my laptop and stared at the ceiling. 3 years ago, I would have gone into that meeting hoping to be understood. Now, I was going in prepared to be respected. And if he slipped again on dates, on numbers, on intent, I wouldn't interrupt. I'd let him talk. Because the thing about people who double down, they eventually overplay. And when they do, all you have to do is keep the receipts. Wednesday came faster than I expected. I arrived at the cafe 20 minutes early, not because I was nervous, because I like exits. Corner table, clear view of the door, back not fully exposed to the room. Old habits don't disappear, they adapt. I ordered black coffee and opened my tablet, not to scroll, but to review the document I drafted. 3 headings: communication boundaries, property timeline, and stipend disbursement repair conditions. Underneath each were bullet points: clean, neutral, specific. Caleb walked in at exactly 3:02 p.m., 2 minutes late. He noticed I noticed. He smiled anyway. Mom followed a step behind him, looking smaller than she had in years. Caleb slid into the chair across from me. Mom took the one beside him. "Thanks for coming," he said. "I said I would." He nodded. "Let's keep this productive." Interesting word choice. Productive. I closed my tablet but kept it in front of me. "We will," I said. A server came by. Caleb ordered something complicated with almond milk and 2 flavor shots. Mom asked for tea. No one commented on my black coffee. Caleb folded his hands. "I'll start." "Of course you will." "I think we've let misunderstandings spiral," he said smoothly. "We both want what's best for Margot. The property situation has created tension that doesn't need to exist." I didn't interrupt, he continued. "I acknowledge that the medication footage looked concerning. Looked concerning. Not was concerning. But I was acting out of concern," he added quickly. "Not malice." Mom nodded slightly, like she wanted that to be true. I let the silence stretch. Caleb shifted. "You've made it clear you want boundaries," he said. "Email-only communication feels extreme." "It's temporary," I replied calmly. 90 days. "It makes us feel like adversaries. We are in a legal process," I said evenly. He inhaled through his nose. "Fine, email only for estate matters." Mom looked relieved that something had been conceded. "Next," he continued, "the stipend." There it was. He leaned forward slightly. "You know how this looks?" "I do," I said. "So waive part of it," he said plainly, "as a gesture of goodwill." There it was again. Gesture. Goodwill. Translation: give up leverage. "I won't," I said calmly. Mom flinched slightly. Caleb's jaw tightened. "Why?" "Because it was Margot's decision," I said, "and because unpaid labor isn't erased by optics." He opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. Because he knew that fight wouldn't land publicly anymore. "Okay," he said. "Then let's talk sale timing. The developer's still interested." "Under what revised projection?" I asked softly. He blinked. Markets shifted slightly. "How much?" He hesitated. 1.72, he said. Mom looked surprised. "I thought it was 1.8. He glanced at her. "That was preliminary." I didn't move. "When was the revised projection given?" I asked. "Last week." "Before or after the mediation?" "After." I held his gaze. "Forward the email," I said calmly. He stiffened. "You don't trust me? This is about documentation." He leaned back, annoyed. "You always need proof." "Yes." Silence. Mom looked between us like she was watching a tennis match she didn't understand. Then Caleb tried something new. "You know," he said, voice softening, "if you hadn't joined the army, things might have been different." The topic shift was so abrupt it almost impressed me. "How?" I asked. "You left," he said. "You removed yourself. You weren't around when Margot first started declining." I stared at him. "I deployed," I said evenly. "I didn't disappear." "You chose distance," he replied. Mom looked uncomfortable. "Caleb?" "No," he continued. "She's acting like she's been the only one invested, but she wasn't here for years." There it was, rewriting history. I kept my voice calm. "Margot's cognitive decline was formally documented 5 years ago," I said. "I left active duty 6 years ago. I've lived 30 minutes away since." He blinked, a microsecond. He hadn't expected me to know the exact timeline. "You weren't around as much before that," he insisted. "I was," I said. "I have call logs." Silence. Then he slipped. "Well, I was managing my business expansion then. I couldn't just drop everything in 2018. Mom frowned slightly. "Your expansion was 2019. He froze. Another crack. Dates. Always the dates. I didn't pounce. I didn't need to. I just said gently, "Caleb, the problem isn't that you weren't available, it's that you've rewritten availability." He looked at me sharply. "You make everything sound clinical. I make it accurate." He exhaled hard. "You know what?" he said. "Fine. Keep the stipend. Delay the sale. Do your therapy condition. But don't pretend you're morally superior." I held his gaze. "I'm not superior," I said quietly. "I'm accountable." That hit him harder than if I'd insulted him, because accountability was the one thing he'd been dodging. Mom reached for her tea, hands trembling slightly. What about personal things? She asked carefully. Your graduation, holidays. I inhaled slowly. I don't want pressure, I said. If I invite you, come. If I don't, respect it. Caleb scoffed lightly. So we have to earn seats now? No, I replied. You have to respect boundaries. He leaned forward again, eyes sharper now. You think you hold all the leverage? I didn't answer, because he wasn't entirely wrong. And that's when he said it. You're forgetting something. What? I asked. He held my gaze steadily. The house isn't the only asset in Margot's estate. The words were casual, but deliberate. Mom looked confused. What do you mean? That Caleb's eyes never left mine. I mean, he said slowly, there are other accounts, investments, things you might not have visibility into. I felt something shift in my chest, because he was right about one thing. There was more, but not in the way he thought. And as he leaned back, watching for my reaction, I realized something else. He thought he'd just regained ground. He thought there was a hidden card I didn't know about. What he didn't realize was that I'd been holding one all along, and I hadn't even needed to use it yet. The house isn't the only asset in Margot's estate. Caleb said it like he was setting down a chess piece he'd been saving. Mom looked between us. What other assets? He kept his eyes on me, waiting for a reaction. I gave him none. Investment accounts, he said casually. Long-term funds, things that weren't discussed in mediation because they're not tied directly to the property. Which ones? I asked calmly. He smirked faintly. You don't know? There it was. He thought he'd found a blind spot. Mom looked confused. Caleb, what are you talking about? He turned slightly toward her. Margot's brokerage account, the one Uncle Daniel set up decades ago. Mom frowned. That account was mostly depleted after the market downturn. Not entirely, he said smoothly. I took a slow sip of coffee, because I did know about the brokerage account. What he didn't know was that I knew more than he did. When did you last review that account? I asked gently. He blinked. A few months ago. Through what authorization? I asked. His jaw tightened. Mom has access. Mom looked startled. I haven't logged into that account in years. A flicker. Small, but there. Caleb adjusted quickly. I mean, she has the right to. That's different, I said softly. He looked at me sharply. Are you accusing me of something? I'm asking for documentation, I replied. Mom's teacup rattled slightly against the saucer. Caleb, she said slowly, have you been moving money? His reaction was instant. Of course not. Too fast. I was reviewing performance, he added. When? I asked again. February. I tilted my head slightly. Before or after Margot's cognitive reassessment? He hesitated. After. Which one? I asked. Mom looked increasingly uneasy. Caleb? There was only one, he said. I held his gaze. There were two, I replied evenly. January and March. Silence. He didn't answer immediately, which meant he hadn't known that, because I'd attended both, and that's when I decided it was time to place my card on the table. I didn't mention this in mediation, I said calmly, because it wasn't necessary at the time. Caleb's eyes narrowed. Mention what? Mom asked. I reached into my bag and pulled out a slim folder, not thick like Dr. Keller's, not dramatic, just precise. Last year, I said, Margot updated more than just her caregiving directive. Caleb's expression shifted. Subtle, but real. She restructured her estate, I continued. The brokerage account you're referencing was rolled into a charitable remainder trust. Mom blinked. Charitable? Yes. For what? Caleb asked too quickly. For veteran caregiver support initiatives, I said. Silence, deep, heavy, unavoidable. Caleb stared at me. What? He said flatly. It was finalized 11 months ago, I continued. Margot was very clear. She didn't want family conflict over liquid assets. Mom's voice was barely audible. She didn't tell me that. She didn't want pressure, I said gently. Caleb leaned back slowly. That's not possible, he said. It is, I replied calmly. The paperwork is filed. He stared at the folder in my hands. How much? He asked. The question slipped out before he could stop it. There it was again. Money first. Mom's head turned toward him slowly. I didn't answer the amount. Instead, I said, enough that it won't be part of estate distribution. He swallowed. You manipulated her, he said quietly. No, I said evenly. I respected her. She wouldn't just give it away. She didn't, I corrected. It funds structured programs with oversight. His eyes sharpened. Oversight by whom? Here it was. The part he wouldn't like. By the foundation board, I said, which includes me. Silence detonated between us. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. You're on the board? Yes. Since when? Caleb demanded. Since its formation, his breathing shifted. He hadn't expected that. He'd thought he was the only one positioning for long-term control. But while he was projecting 1.8 million sale values, I'd been helping Margot build something quieter, something that outlasted property. You've been planning this, he said. No, I replied calmly. I've been participating. Mom looked overwhelmed. Why didn't anyone tell me? Because, I said gently, every time finances are discussed in this family, they turn into competition. Caleb's jaw flexed. You're cutting us out, he said. No, I said. Margot diversified her legacy. He stared at me like he was seeing a stranger. You always wanted control, he muttered. I wanted fairness, I corrected. He laughed bitterly. You're sitting on a board that controls a charitable trust funded by our aunt's estate, and you're lecturing me about fairness? Yes, I said quietly, because it's transparent. That word landed. Transparent. He had no documentation. I did. Mom finally spoke, voice shaky. So, what does this mean? It means, I said gently, that the property is the last remaining major asset subject to division. The brokerage funds aren't part of that equation anymore. Caleb's gaze hardened. You knew this before mediation. Yes, and you let me. Assume, I finished softly. He stood abruptly. You set me up. No, I said calmly. You set yourself up. His breathing was shallow now, anger mixed with something else. Loss of control. You think this makes you untouchable, he said. It makes me documented, I replied. Mom looked between us, eyes wide. You two are talking like opponents, she whispered. We are, Caleb said sharply. I shook my head slowly. I'm not your opponent, I said quietly. I'm your equal. That landed harder than anything else I'd said, because equal meant something he'd never had to consider. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he said very softly, This isn't over. Third time, same line. But this time, it didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like disbelief. And as he turned toward the cafe door, I realized something. The first climax had been the footage. The second was this, the collapse of financial illusion. He'd built his confidence on assumed control. And now, the numbers weren't bending to him. The narrative wasn't bending to him. Mom wasn't automatically siding with him. He paused at the door, looked back once, and for the first time in my life, he looked unsure. But escalation doesn't end at uncertainty. It shifts. And I had a feeling the next move wouldn't be about money. It would be about emotion. Because when facts fail, people reach for feelings, and feelings are harder to timestamp. Caleb didn't contact me for 12 days, which meant he was planning something. Silence, with him, was never surrender. It was strategy. Mom, however, texted on day 3. Can we have lunch? Just us? I agreed. Neutral location. Public. Midday. She arrived 10 minutes early and already looked exhausted. Not physically. Emotionally. I didn't know about the trust, she said before we even ordered. I know, I replied gently. She wrapped both hands around her water glass. Was she upset with me? There it was. Not about money, about love. No, I said calmly. She was strategic. Mom looked confused. Margot knew how conflict works in this family, I continued. She removed the variable. By removing us? By removing temptation, I corrected. Mom's eyes watered slightly. She told me once, Mom said quietly, that you were the only one who didn't ask her for anything. I didn't know that, and for a moment I felt something sharp in my chest. I did not ask strategically, I said softly. I know, Mom whispered. Silence settled. Then she inhaled shakily. Caleb is angry, I assumed. He thinks you've been building a case against him for years. I didn't react outwardly. I've been building documentation, I said evenly. That feels the same to him. It isn't. She nodded slowly. Then she said something that made the air change. He's been talking to people. I met her eyes. What people? Extended family, church members, some of Margot's old friends. There it was, emotional escalation. What is he saying? I asked calmly. Mom hesitated. That you influenced Margot when she was vulnerable. Ah, there it is, the oldest tactic in the book. Question capacity, question motive, plant doubt. I leaned back slightly. Has he filed anything formally? I asked. No. Has anyone contacted you directly with concerns? No. Then it's narrative shaping, I said. Mom looked uneasy. It sounds ugly. It is, I agreed. She lowered her voice. He said you isolated Margot. I almost smiled. By attending medical appointments, I asked. He says you positioned yourself as indispensable. I let that sit. Then I said quietly, being dependable is not the same as being manipulative. Mom nodded weakly. But people don't always see nuance, she whispered. I know. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't about assets anymore. It was about reputation. And reputation is harder to defend than property because doubt spreads quietly. You should prepare, Mom said softly. For what? For him to push this further. He didn't wait long. 4 days later, I received a certified letter. Not from him, from an attorney. Subject line, request for review of testamentary capacity and undue influence. There it was. Formal now. He wasn't contesting the house. He was challenging the trust. Claim, Margot may not have had full capacity at the time of restructuring. Claim, I may have exerted undue influence. I read it twice. Then I did something very simple. I checked the date of the trust formation, 11 months ago. Then I checked the date of Margot's cognitive evaluation closest to that filing, 10 days prior, comprehensive, signed, clear capacity, and witnessed. I closed my eyes briefly. He hadn't checked the timeline, or he had, and was gambling anyway. Either way, it was escalation. I called Dr. Keller. Not emotionally, procedurally. I expected this might happen, she said calmly. Because of the footage, I asked. Because of power shifts, she replied. She agreed to provide an affidavit if needed. Then I called the estate attorney. Calm voice, structured plan. He didn't sound surprised either. These claims happen when financial expectations change, he said plainly. Do we respond aggressively? I asked. No, he said. We respond accurately. That word again, accurate. That night, I didn't feel angry. I felt tired. Not because of the legal maneuver, because of the implication that caregiving must equal control, that proximity must equal manipulation, that competence must be suspicious. My phone buzzed. Caleb. Of course, I let it ring once, twice. Then I answered. You moved fast, I said calmly. You forced my hand, he replied. You didn't check the evaluation dates, did you? Silence. Then, that's not the point. It is legally the point. His voice sharpened. You think paperwork protects you from everything. It protects truth, I replied. You isolated her. I scheduled her neurologist. You convinced her to restructure. I asked her what she wanted her legacy to be. You were always in her ear. I was always in the room. Silence. Then he shifted tone. Lower. Almost wounded. She trusted you more than us. There it was. Not money, not control, access. I softened slightly. She trusted consistency, I said quietly. He exhaled slowly. You're gonna fight this. Yes, you'll win. If the facts hold. Another silence. Then, unexpectedly, I didn't think she'd choose something that permanent. She didn't choose against you, I said. She chose beyond us. He didn't respond immediately. When he spoke again, his voice had lost some of its edge. You could have told me. Would you have supported it? Long pause. No, that's why she didn't. He let out a slow breath. This will get ugly. Only if you push it past documentation. He didn't answer, and then he said something I didn't expect. If I withdraw the claim, what happens? I paused. You'd need to do it formally. And personally? There it is. Emotion, not law. You'd need to stop reframing caregiving as manipulation, I said quietly. Silence. That's harder, he admitted. Yes, I said, it is. We stayed on the line without speaking for several seconds. Then he said, I don't like feeling replaced. And finally, we were at the real issue. You weren't replaced, I said gently. You were absent. The line went quiet. Not angry quiet, reflective quiet. I'll call my attorney tomorrow, he said at last. We'll see. Click. I stared at my phone. This wasn't over, but it had shifted again. Not just legal, not just financial. Now it was identity. And identity fights aren't won with documents. They're resolved with something much more fragile. Acknowledgement. The question wasn't whether he'd withdraw. The question was whether he could tolerate a version of himself that wasn't the central figure. And that was going to determine everything. Caleb didn't withdraw the claim the next day or the day after, but the attorney emailed mine. Tone noticeably softened. They were reviewing documentation. Translation, they'd finally looked at the evaluation dates. 10 days before the trust formation, clear cognitive capacity, signed, witnessed, video recorded. Yes, video recorded. Not by me, by the estate firm. Standard procedure for high-value restructurings involving elderly clients. Caleb hadn't expected that. He'd expected gray areas, ambiguity, emotion. What he found was time-stamped clarity. 3 weeks later, we were seated in a different conference room, not mediation this time, pre-litigation review. Caleb looked different, still composed, but not sharp-edged, less certain. His attorney did most of the talking. They asked procedural questions, requested copies, reviewed the neurological report, watched a portion of the recording. In the video, Margot's voice was steady. She explained clearly why she wanted the trust. "I don't want my family fighting over numbers," she said in the recording. "I want something useful to come from what I saved." Then she laughed softly. "And if they fight anyway, at least it won't be about this." The room had gone quiet when that line played. Caleb didn't look at me. He looked at the table. Afterward, his attorney cleared his throat. "We'll be advising our client to reconsider the petition." Professional language. Translation. This won't hold. We adjourned without hostility, without drama, just inevitability. That evening, Caleb texted, not called, texted. "Can we talk?" Not about lawyers, I agreed. We met at the same cafe, same corner table, no folders this time. He didn't order anything complicated, just coffee, black, like mine. We sat in silence for a moment, then he said, "She sounds clear in the video." "Yes. I didn't know she'd recorded it." "Most people don't." He nodded slowly. "I thought you'd convinced her." "I asked her questions," I said calmly. "She answered them." He stared at his cup. "I keep replaying something," he admitted. "What?" "The way she said she didn't want us fighting." I didn't interrupt. He exhaled. "I didn't think I was fighting her. I thought I was fighting you." "That's usually how it works," I said quietly. He gave a small, humorless smile. "I really believed you were positioning yourself." "I was," I said. He looked up sharply, and for responsibility, I added. Not dominance, not control, responsibility. He leaned back. "I didn't see the difference. I know." Silence stretched, but it wasn't tense. It was recalibrating. "I withdrew the petition," he said finally. "I assumed you would." "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Act like you knew I'd make the right choice." I held his gaze. "I hoped," I corrected. That landed differently. He rubbed a hand over his face. "I don't like who I've been in this," he admitted quietly. That was new. Not defensive, not strategic, honest. "Identity feels threatened when hierarchy shifts," I said. He laughed faintly, still clinical. "It helps me stay steady." He nodded. "I grew up thinking I'd be the one managing things," he said. "Finances, decisions. That's how everyone treated me." "I know. And then you came back from the army and you weren't asking for space. You were just taking it." "I was stepping into it," I corrected gently. He looked at me for a long moment. "You didn't need permission." "No." Another quiet stretch. Then, "I wasn't absent on purpose," he said. "I know. I was building something, my business, my life." "And that mattered," I said. "But caregiving doesn't pause for ambition." He winced slightly. "That sounds like a judgment." "It's not," I said softly. "It's physics." That almost made him smile. Almost. "I don't want us to be adversaries," he said finally. "Then don't compete for roles that aren't competitions." He considered that. "What role do you think I'm trying to compete for?" "Primary," I said. His jaw flexed slightly. "And you?" "I never needed primary," I replied. "I needed stability." That shifted something, because stability isn't glamorous, it's not loud, it doesn't come with applause, it just holds. "I don't know how to do this differently," he admitted. "That's honest," I said. "And you?" "I do," I replied quietly. He looked at me, waiting. "Stop framing proximity as power," I said. "Start framing it as labor." He sat with that, then nodded slowly. "That's going to take practice." Yes, we didn't hug, we didn't dramatize reconciliation, but something real happened. Not forgiveness, not resolution, recognition. He stood to leave, paused, then said, "For what it's worth, she chose well." I held his gaze. "She didn't choose me over you." "I know," he said quietly. And this time, he actually did. The property sale was delayed 6 months, market adjusted, numbers settled. The stipend continued until closing. No one contested it again. The trust launched its first caregiver support grant program 3 months later. Modest, structured, transparent. Mom attended the small launch event. Caleb didn't, but he sent a donation, anonymous. I knew it was him anyway. Not because I traced it, because the amount was precise, calculated, like him. But the gesture wasn't about optics, it was about adjustment. And that was enough. People think conflict ends in explosion. Sometimes it ends in recalibration, in redefining roles, in accepting that legacy isn't ownership, it's stewardship. Margot understood that. Eventually, so did we. The house sold in early spring, not at 1.8, not at 1.72, 1.76. Close enough to everyone's pride that no one argued. We met at the closing office together, Caleb, Mom, and me. No lawyers in the room this time, just signatures, initials. Quiet acknowledgement that something long contested was now simply Done. When the final document slid across the table, I hesitated for half a second before signing. Not because of the money, because of memory. That porch. Margot's wind chimes. The faint indentation on the hallway wall where furniture had been moved too many times. Caleb noticed the pause. "You okay?" he asked. Yes. He didn't press. That was new. The stipend ended the following month. No ceremony, no commentary, just a final deposit and a clean ledger. Strangely, I didn't feel lighter. I felt transitioned. Caregiving had structured my weeks for years. Appointments, medication schedules, check-ins. Now there was space, and space is loud when you're used to urgency. The trust, however, didn't slow down. The first grant cycle funded 12 caregivers, small stipends, respite vouchers, therapy reimbursements, nothing dramatic, but measurable. Transparent. At the first annual review meeting, the board sat around a modest conference table, spreadsheets, impact summaries. One of the recipients sent a letter. Handwritten. I didn't realize how tired I was until someone offered to hold things for a minute. I read that line twice. Then a third time. Caleb attended that meeting, not as family, not as challenger, as observer. He didn't speak much, but he listened. Afterward in the parking lot, he said, "I didn't understand this part." "Which part?" "That caregiving isn't heroic, it's exhausting." "Yes." He nodded slowly. "I used to think you liked being the strong one." I almost laughed. "No one likes being the only one." That stayed with him. I could see it. Mom adjusted too. Without the constant tension of mediation, she seemed steadier. She started volunteering at a community center twice a week. Not because she needed something to do, because she needed something that wasn't us. One Sunday afternoon, she said something I didn't expect. "I used to compare you two constantly." I raised an eyebrow. "Used to?" She smiled faintly. "I thought if one was ahead, the other had to catch up." "That explains a lot," she sighed. "It wasn't fair." "No," I agreed gently. "It wasn't." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Not dramatically, just firmly. Acknowledgement travels in small gestures. Caleb and I still disagree. About investments, about timing, about strategy. But we don't question each other's motives anymore. That's the difference. Last week, he asked for my input on something unrelated to the estate, a business expansion. He didn't frame it as a test, he framed it as consultation. And when I disagreed with one of his projections, he didn't defend it reflexively. He asked, "Walk me through that." Progress isn't loud, it's incremental. There's a photo of Margot that sits on my desk now, not the formal portrait from her retirement party, a candid one. She's mid-laugh, wind in her hair, eyes sharp, alive. When I look at it, I don't think about the footage, or the mediation, or the legal letters. I think about something she said once, long before any of this escalated. "Families don't break because of money," she told me. "They break because of meaning." At the time, I didn't fully understand. Now I do. Money was never the real fight. Control wasn't either. It was about who mattered, who was trusted, who was seen. The trust didn't just protect assets, it redirected meaning. Away from possession, toward purpose. And that shift did what arguments couldn't. It stabilized us, not perfectly, not permanently, but enough. Sometimes that's the most realistic ending. Not a reunion, not a victory, a recalibration, and a quiet decision to build forward instead of fighting backward.